Jack Reynolds gasped for air as his ship spun out of control. Red warning lights flashed inside the cockpit, alarms screaming in his ears. The control panel was fried, sparks flying from damaged wires. Outside, a thick green jungle stretched endlessly beneath him. "Come on, stay together," Jack muttered, gripping the controls tightly. But it was no use. His ship was falling fast, and the best he could do was brace for impact. The moment came too soon. The ship smashed through towering trees, metal screeching as branches tore into the hull. Jack's seat restraints held him in place, but his body jolted violently. With a final crash, the ship slammed into the ground, skidding through dense undergrowth before coming to a dead stop. Then, silence. Jack groaned, his head spinning. His fingers fumbled at the seatbelt, releasing it with a click. Smoke filled the cockpit, stinging his eyes. He had to get out before something exploded. Using what little strength he had left, he pushed open the emergency hatch and stumbled into the open air. The jungle was alive with sound, strange cries of unseen creatures, the rustling of massive leaves in the wind. Humid air filled his lungs, carrying the scent of damp earth and something unfamiliar, almost electric. Jack turned to inspect his ship. The once sleek explorer craft was now a wreck, half buried in twisted roots. His emergency beacon, the one thing that could call for rescue, was shattered. He was stranded. He ran a hand through his short brown hair, forcing himself to think. "All right, Jack. First step, supplies." He climbed back inside, searching for anything useful. A survival pack, a flare gun, and a knife. Better than nothing. His helmet's HUD flickered on, scanning the atmosphere. The oxygen levels were safe, and the temperature was warm but bearable. At least he wouldn't suffocate. A deep growl echoed through the trees. Jack froze. Something was watching him. Slowly, he turned his head, eyes scanning the dense foliage. At first, he saw nothing but enormous ferns and thick vines. Then he spotted it, a pair of glowing yellow eyes, fixed on him from the shadows. Jack's heart pounded. The creature stepped forward, revealing the muscular, panther-like body covered in black scales. It was big, easily the size of a bear, with long, curved claws. Its nostrils flared as it sniffed the air, lips curling back to reveal sharp teeth. Jack knew running was useless. This thing was a predator, built for speed. Instead, he gripped his knife tightly and backed away slowly. "Easy there," he whispered. The beast snarled and lunged. Jack dived to the side, rolling across the dirt. The creature's claws tore into the metal of his ship, slicing through it like paper. Scrambling to his feet, Jack fired his flare gun. The bright red light shot into the air, bursting with a loud pop. The beast flinched at the sudden brightness, giving Jack the moment he needed. He sprinted into the jungle, weaving through thick vegetation. He didn't look back, only listening to the crashing sounds of the predator chasing him. His foot caught on a root, and he tumbled forward, landing hard. Before he could get up, a shadow fell over him. The creature loomed above, ready to strike. Then, out of nowhere, a deep, thunderous roar shook the trees. Jack barely had time to react before something massive barreled into the beast, sending it flying. Leaves and dust filled the air. Jack coughed, blinking through the haze. And that's when he saw her. Towering over him was a figure unlike anything he had ever seen. A woman, if he could even call her that, stood at least 13 feet tall. Her deep blue skin shimmered under the strange alien sun, muscles rippling beneath the tribal armor she wore. Long, dark braids framed a sharp, angular face, her piercing silver eyes locked onto the wounded predator. Jack could only stare as she crouched low, her clawed fingers digging into the dirt. The beast recovered and lunged at her, but she moved like lightning. With a powerful swing, she caught the creature's throat in her massive hand and twisted. There was a sickening crack. The predator went limp. Silence fell once again. Jack sat frozen, gripping his knife, though he knew it was useless against her. The towering warrior turned her gaze toward him, her expression unreadable. Then, to his shock, she reached down and picked him up as if he weighed nothing. "Hey, wait." Jack struggled, but her grip was firm. She slung him over her shoulder like a trophy, speaking in a deep, commanding voice. He didn't understand the words, but there was no mistaking her tone. She had claimed him. And Jack had no idea what that meant. Jack struggled against the giant woman's grip, but it was useless. Her arm was like solid steel, holding him firmly in place as she strode through the jungle with long, powerful steps. He hung over her shoulder, his face near her back, and every time he moved, he felt the sheer strength in her muscles. "This is a misunderstanding." Jack tried to reason with her, but she didn't even glance at him. "I don't belong to you. I'm not a pet or whatever you think I am." The giant woman said something in her deep, commanding voice, but Jack couldn't understand a single word. Her language was strange, sharp yet rhythmic, with rolling sounds that almost seemed musical. Jack sighed in frustration. He had survived a ship crash, escaped a deadly alien beast, and now he was captured by an enormous warrior woman who carried him like a prize. His head bounced slightly as she leaped over a fallen tree with ease. Jack looked around, taking in his surroundings. The jungle was dense, with massive trees stretching high into the sky, their thick roots twisting across the ground. Strange glowing plants dotted the landscape, pulsing with faint blue and green light. The air was thick with the sounds of alien life, distant roars, insect-like chirping, and the rustle of leaves as unseen creatures moved through the canopy above. Jack needed to figure out a way to escape. He reached down, searching for his knife, but the moment his fingers touched the handle, the giant woman's grip tightened around his waist. She knew what he was trying to do. All right," he muttered, raising his hands in surrender. "No knife." She seemed satisfied and continued walking. Jack clenched his jaw. If fighting wasn't an option, then he had to try something else. He cleared his throat. "So, where exactly are you taking me?" No response. "Do you, have a name?" Again, silence. Jack exhaled. "Great, kidnapped by a giant, and she doesn't even talk to me." A moment later, the woman suddenly stopped. Jack felt her body tense, her head turned slightly as if listening to something. Then, without warning, she leaped straight up. Jack barely had time to react before they were soaring through the air. His stomach lurched as she landed effortlessly on a massive tree branch, nearly 50 feet above the ground. He gasped, gripping her shoulder for balance. "What the?" Before he could process what just happened, she jumped again, moving from tree to tree with incredible speed. Jack could feel the wind rushing past his face, the jungle floor a blur below them. It was like something out of a dream or a nightmare. Finally, after several leaps, she landed on a thick wooden platform built between the trees. Jack blinked in shock. A village. Dozens of massive wooden structures stretched across the treetops, connected by sturdy bridges made of thick vines. The buildings were carved into the trunks of colossal trees, their designs blending seamlessly with nature. Fires burned in metal braziers, casting a warm glow over the area. And then he saw them. More giants. They were everywhere, tall, muscular beings with deep blue skin, dressed in tribal armor made of leather and metal. Some had intricate markings on their arms and faces, while others carried massive weapons, spears, axes, and strange curved blades. Their eyes gleamed like silver as they turned to look at him. Jack swallowed hard. The warrior woman carrying him finally stopped in front of a large wooden structure that looked like a central hall. She set Jack down, not gently, and stepped back, placing a firm hand on his shoulder as if to tell him to stay put. Jack straightened up, rubbing his sore ribs. "Yeah, I got it. No running." A group of elders stood before him, their expressions unreadable. They spoke in their strange language, their deep voices resonating in the air. Jack glanced at the woman beside him. She responded to the elders, her tone confident. She gestured toward him as she spoke, and from the way she stood, her chest puffed out, her chin high, it was clear she was making some kind of claim. Jack didn't need a translator to understand what was happening. She was claiming him. One of the elders, an older giant with braided silver hair and a scared face, narrowed his eyes at Jack. He said something that made the surrounding warriors chuckle. Jack sighed. I'm guessing that wasn't a compliment. The elder stepped closer, looking him up and down as if inspecting an animal. Jack held his ground, refusing to show fear. He had no idea what was about to happen, but he wasn't about to let them see him as weak. After a long moment, the elder spoke again, his voice firm. The warrior woman next to Jack grinned, and then she grabbed his wrist and raised his arm high. The entire village erupted into cheers and laughter. Some warriors clapped their hands against their chests, others banged their weapons together. The sound was deafening. Jack frowned. Okay, what just happened? The warrior woman looked at him, her silver eyes full of amusement. She placed a hand on his shoulder and spoke one word, her voice softer this time. Valkyrie. Jack hesitated. Is that your name? She nodded. Jack exhaled. All right, Valkyrie. Now, can someone please tell me what's going on? Valkyrie smirked, then pointed at herself, and then at him. Jack's eyes widened. Wait. No. Are you saying that you? Before he could finish, Valkyrie pulled him into a sudden, tight embrace. Jack groaned. Oh, come on. The village erupted into laughter again. Jack had a sinking feeling. He wasn't just claimed. He was hers. Jack sat on a wooden platform near the center of the village, arms crossed, frustration clear on his face. Around him, massive warriors moved through the treetop settlement, speaking in their strange language, laughing, and casting amused glances in his direction. He had been in weird situations before, but this was on a whole new level. The towering warrior woman, Valkyrie, stood beside him, clearly pleased with herself. She had claimed him, whatever that meant, and the entire village seemed to think it was hilarious. Jack let out a long breath. Look, I don't belong here. I need to find a way off this planet. I have a life somewhere else, okay? Valkyrie tilted her head, her silver eyes shining with amusement. She clearly didn't understand him. Jack stood up and mimed an explosion, then pointed at the sky. Boom! My ship. Destroyed. He made a flying motion with his hand. I need help getting off this planet. Valkyrie's expression didn't change. Instead, she smirked and pounded a fist against her chest. Jack sighed. That's not an answer. Before he could try again, the village elder, the scared man with braided silver hair, stepped forward. He raised a hand, and the crowd around them fell silent. Then he pointed at Jack and spoke in a firm voice. Jack frowned. Why do I feel like I'm not gonna like what he just said? Valkyrie chuckled. She motioned for Jack to follow her. When he hesitated, she simply grabbed his wrist and pulled him along. Yeah, of course. Why walk when I can be dragged? Jack muttered. The villagers gathered around as Valkyrie led him toward a large open space in the center of the settlement. The ground was reinforced with thick wooden planks, forming what looked like an arena. Jack's stomach dropped. Oh no. Valkyrie stepped into the center, then turned to face him. She clapped her hands together and spoke a single word. Jack didn't need a translator to understand. Fight. He pointed to himself. You want me to fight you? Valkyrie grinned. Jack looked up, way up, at the towering warrior. She was over twice his size, pure muscle, and had literally snapped the neck of a deadly alien predator with one hand. Jack let out a nervous laugh. Oh, that's a terrible idea. The elder barked another command, and the warriors surrounding the arena stomped their feet in rhythm. The sound was like rolling thunder. Jack rubbed his temples. Okay, let me guess. If I win, I get to leave, right? Valkyrie smirked and shrugged. as if to say, if you can. Jack took a deep breath. He had two choices: stand there and get crushed, or think of something fast. Outsmarting giants. The moment Jack stepped forward, Valkyrie charged. She was fast. Jack barely had time to react before she swung at him. He ducked, rolling to the side just as her fist crashed into the ground where he had been standing. The wooden planks shattered under the impact. Jack's heart pounded. Yeah, definitely not fighting her head-on. Valkyrie grinned, clearly enjoying this. She lunged again, swiping at him with her clawed fingers. Jack jumped back, barely avoiding the blow. The crowd roared with excitement. Jack needed a new plan. He couldn't match her strength, but maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to. He glanced around the arena, spotting a pile of wooden spears resting against the far wall. All right, he muttered. Time to be smart. As Valkyrie charged again, Jack sprinted toward the weapons. She swung at him. Fast. Jack dove forward, sliding under her arm at the last second. The crowd gasped. Jack grabbed a spear, spun around, and held it out in front of him. He wasn't planning to stab her, just keep her at a distance. Valkyrie tilted her head, amused. She stepped forward. Jack jabbed the spear toward her. Not attacking, just testing. She caught the spear with one hand and snapped it in half. Jack blinked. Oh, cool. That's fair. Valkyrie lunged, but this time, Jack was ready. He dodged to the side and grabbed a handful of dirt from the ground. The moment she turned, he threw it at her face. She flinched. The crowd gasped again. Jack took the opening, darting behind her. He grabbed the remains of the broken spear and pressed the dull end against the back of her knee, the one spot where her stance was weakest. Valkyrie's leg buckled slightly. Jack leaped onto her back and locked his arms around her neck in a desperate hold. The crowd went wild. Valkyrie let out a surprised laugh. She reached up, grabbed Jack's arm, and flipped him over her shoulder like he weighed nothing. Jack hit the ground hard. For a moment, the world spun. When he opened his eyes, Valkyrie was grinning down at him, her silver eyes full of amusement. Jack groaned. I take it that means I lost. Valkyrie let out a deep, throaty chuckle and offered him a hand. Jack hesitated, then sighed, and took it. She pulled him to his feet effortlessly. The elder stepped forward, looking at Jack with something new in his expression. Respect. He said something to Valkyrie, who smirked and nodded. Jack frowned. What? What did he say? Valkyrie pointed at him and spoke a single word. Warrior. Jack blinked. Wait. What? The crowd erupted into cheers, warriors stomping their feet in rhythm again. Jack turned in confusion as Valkyrie placed a hand on his shoulder and nodded approvingly. Jack slowly realized what had just happened. He hadn't needed to win. He just needed to prove he wasn't weak. Jack exhaled, shaking his head. Great. First, I get claimed. Now, I'm a warrior. This just keeps getting better. Valkyrie clapped him on the back so hard he nearly fell over. The village celebrated. Jack sighed. Yeah, sure. Let's celebrate the fact that I almost got crushed. As the warriors cheered around him, Jack couldn't help but wonder, what exactly had he gotten himself into? Jack sat on a thick wooden bench near a massive bonfire, rubbing his sore shoulder. The village was alive with celebration. Warriors cheered, clapped their hands, and pounded their chests in excitement. The sound of drums filled the air, their deep rhythm shaking the wooden platforms beneath his feet. He still couldn't believe what had just happened. One moment, he was struggling to avoid getting crushed by a 13-foot-tall warrior woman. And the next, the village had declared him a warrior. He wasn't sure how dodging and throwing dirt counted as warrior skills, but apparently it was enough to earn their respect. At least they weren't trying to eat him. That was progress. Valkyrie sat beside him, laughing heartily as she drank from a massive stone cup. Her silver eyes gleamed in the firelight, still full of amusement from their earlier fight. Every time Jack looked at her, she grinned like she was enjoying some private joke. Jack sighed. "You really enjoyed that, didn't you?" Valkyrie smirked and pounded a fist against her chest. "Valkyrie, strong." She then pointed at him. "Jack, small." Jack groaned. Yeah. Thanks for the reminder." The warriors around them laughed. Jack wasn't sure if they were laughing with him or at him. Probably both. A young warrior approached, holding a plate made from large leaves. On it was a piece of sizzling meat, golden and dripping with juices. He offered it to Jack with a respectful nod. Jack hesitated. His stomach was growling, but he had no idea what kind of meat this was. For all he knew, it could be from that beast that tried to eat him earlier. Valkyrie noticed his hesitation. She grabbed a chunk of meat from her own plate and took a big bite, chewing happily. Then she pointed at his food. "Eat." Jack sighed. "Guess I don't have much of a choice." He took a cautious bite. His eyes widened. It was good. Savory, smoky, with a flavor that reminded him of a mix between beef and roasted spices. He hadn't realized how hungry he was until now. He quickly took another bite, and then another. Valkyrie grinned. "Jack, eat like warrior." Jack rolled his eyes. "Oh, so eating is a warrior skill now." Valkyrie simply laughed. As Jack ate, he took the chance to observe the village more closely. The warriors were powerful, but there was more to them than just strength. Some were carving weapons, others tending to fires, and a few were carefully weaving ropes from thick jungle vines. There were also children, smaller versions of the towering warriors, playfully wrestling and chasing each other across the wooden platforms. Older warriors watched over them, giving instructions and occasionally stepping in to correct their movements. Jack exhaled. This wasn't just some random group of fighters. This was a society with rules, traditions, and a way of life that had been passed down for generations. And somehow he had become part of it. A strange gift. After the feast, the elder, the scared man with silver hair, approached Jack. The crowd grew silent as the elder looked at him thoughtfully. Then, without a word, he held out a small object wrapped in soft leather. Jack hesitated before carefully unwrapping it. Inside was a knife. But this wasn't just any knife. The blade was made from a strange, dark metal, its edge curved and sharp. The hilt was wrapped in thick leather, and ancient symbols were carved along the base. Jack ran a finger over the markings. "What is this?" Valkyrie leaned closer, her voice softer than before. "Warrior's blade." Jack's breath caught. This wasn't just a gift. It was a symbol. The elder placed a large hand on Jack's shoulder and spoke a few words. Though Jack didn't understand them, the meaning was clear. "You are one of us now." Jack swallowed hard. I don't know what to say." Valkyrie smirked. "Say yes." Jack let out a small laugh and nodded. "Yeah. Okay. Yes." The warriors cheered. A new path. As the celebration continued, Jack found himself relaxing. Maybe he wasn't home, and maybe he was stuck on this alien planet. But for the first time since crashing here, he didn't feel alone. Valkyrie nudged him. "Tomorrow. Training." Jack blinked. "Wait, what?" She grinned. "Warrior must be strong." Jack groaned. "Oh, great. Here we go." The night carried on, filled with laughter, music, and the warmth of the fire. Jack didn't know what the future held. But one thing was certain. His adventure was just beginning. Jack woke up to the sound of drums. The deep, steady rhythm echoed through the village, shaking the wooden platform beneath him. He groaned, rolling onto his side. His entire body ached from yesterday's events. The fight, the feast, and the far too many times Valkyrie had slapped his back like he was made of stone. He squinted against the morning sunlight filtering through the massive jungle canopy. He was lying on a thick pile of animal furs inside a large wooden hut. The air was warm, carrying the scent of roasted meat and jungle flowers. Jack rubbed his face. "Right. still on an alien planet, still stuck with giant warriors. Before he could sit up, the door of the hut swung open. Valkyrie stood in the doorway, arms crossed, grinning. "Jack, up. Now." Jack sighed. "You know, back where I come from, people say good morning first." Valkyrie smirked. "Good morning. Now up." Jack groaned as he pushed himself to his feet. His muscles protested, but he didn't argue. If there was one thing he had learned about Valkyrie, it was that arguing with her never worked. She led him outside, where several warriors were already gathered in the training area. Some were sparring, their weapons clashing loudly, while others practiced lifting massive stone weights. A group of young warriors in training ran across a narrow wooden beam high above the ground, balancing with perfect precision. Jack swallowed hard. "Yeah, this is gonna hurt." Valkyrie grinned. "Yes, strength of the jungle." Jack's training started with the simplest task, running. Well, it should have been simple, except the warriors didn't run on the ground. They ran through the trees. Jack stood at the edge of a thick branch, staring at the path ahead. Vines stretched between trees like natural bridges, and wooden planks connected some of the thicker trunks. Below, the jungle floor was far, far down. He turned to Valkyrie. "Okay, so you guys just jumped through the trees like giant monkeys." Valkyrie tilted her head. "Monkey?" Jack sighed. "Never mind." He took a deep breath. "I'm gonna die." Valkyrie clapped him on the back, hard. "Then run fast." Jack shook his head and took off. At first, he was slow. Every time he jumped from one platform to another, his heart hammered in his chest. The warriors behind him shouted in their language, laughing as he stumbled. But Jack refused to stop. He jumped, landed, ran, again. The more he moved, the more he realized that his body was adapting. His balance improved, his muscles burned, but he forced himself to keep going. He wasn't as strong as the warriors, but he was fast. By the end of the first hour, he wasn't falling anymore. Valkyrie watched with approval. "Not bad, small warrior." Jack collapsed onto a wooden platform, breathing hard. "That was terrible." Valkyrie laughed. "Now fight." Jack groaned. "Oh, come on." The first lesson. Valkyrie led him back to the training area, where a group of warriors stood in a circle. One of them stepped forward. Goran, a huge warrior with dark blue skin and a thick, braided beard. His arms were covered in scars, and he carried a wooden staff nearly as long as Jack was tall. Jack's stomach twisted. "I have to fight him." Valkyrie nodded. "Learn. Fight. Grow stronger." Jack sighed. "Fine. Let's get this over with." He picked up a wooden staff and stepped forward. Goran smiled, then attacked. Jack barely saw the first strike before it slammed into his side, knocking him flat on his back. Pain exploded through his ribs. The warriors laughed, some clapping in amusement. Jack groaned and rolled onto his hands and knees. Valkyrie crouched beside him. Again, Jack wiped dirt from his face. "Are you trying to break me?" Valkyrie smirked. "Yes." Jack took a deep breath and stood up. "Fine." He picked up the staff again. This time, when Goran attacked, Jack dodged. The staff barely missed him. Jack swung his own weapon, but Goran caught it mid-air and knocked him down again. Jack groaned. "Okay, that was embarrassing." Valkyrie leaned in. "Think. Not just strength. Speed. Smart." Jack frowned. "Speed. Smart." He stood up and faced Goran again. This time, when Goran attacked, Jack didn't block. He sidestepped. The warrior's staff whooshed past him. Jack used the opening to strike Goran's leg. The huge warrior stumbled. The crowd gasped. Jack grinned. "Oh, that worked." Valkyrie smiled. "Yes." Jack adjusted his grip on the staff. "All right, big guy. Let's try that again." Earning their respect, The fight lasted several more rounds. Jack lost every single one. But each time, he lasted a little longer. He learned to dodge faster, to watch his opponent's movements, to use his size as an advantage instead of a weakness. By the time Valkyrie finally called the fight to an end, Jack was sore, bruised, and barely standing. But the warriors cheered for him. They clapped his shoulders, pounded their chests, and spoke in excited voices. Even Goran grinned at him, nodding in approval. Jack wiped sweat from his forehead. Okay, so, I didn't die today. That's an improvement. Valkyrie smirked. Tomorrow, harder training. Jack groaned. Of course. As the warriors laughed and the drums of the village continued, Jack realized something. For the first time since crashing on this planet, he didn't feel like an outsider anymore. He was one of them. And whatever came next, he was ready. Jack stood at the edge of a high wooden platform, staring into the dense jungle below. The early morning mist curled between the massive trees, and the distant cries of alien creatures echoed through the air. He took a deep breath. His legs still ached from yesterday's training. His arms felt like lead, and he was pretty sure he had bruises in places he didn't even know could get bruised. And now he had another test. Valkyrie stood beside him, her silver eyes gleaming with excitement. She held out a long spear, placing it in Jack's hands. Hunt, she said simply. Jack frowned. Wait. What? Valkyrie gestured toward the jungle. Warrior must hunt. Prove strength. Jack stared at the spear. You do realize that where I come from, food comes in cans, right? Valkyrie smirked. No cans here, only beasts. Jack sighed. Of course there were. The village elder stepped forward, speaking a few words in a serious tone. Valkyrie translated. Test of warrior. Hunt or fail. Jack frowned. And if I fail? Valkyrie shrugged. Then, you are weak. Jack groaned. Great. No pressure or anything. A group of warriors watched, waiting. Some smirked, as if expecting him to fail. Others nodded in approval, as if hoping he would succeed. Jack gripped the spear tighter. All right, let's do this. With one last deep breath, he stepped off the platform and into the wild. The jungle's challenge. The moment Jack's feet touched the jungle floor, the sounds around him changed. The village had been loud, filled with the clamor of warriors, the pounding of drums, and the crackling of fire. But here, in the depths of the jungle, it was different. It was alive. Leaves rustled as unseen creatures moved between the trees. Strange bird-like things with glowing wings fluttered above. The ground beneath him was damp, covered in thick vines and twisted roots. Jack moved carefully, holding the spear at his side. All right, he muttered. Just find something small, not too dangerous. Easy hunt. As if the jungle itself was listening, a deep growl rumbled through the air. Jack froze. Branches shifted, leaves trembled, and from the shadows of the trees, something massive moved. Jack's grip on the spear tightened. That's not small. A pair of glowing yellow eyes stared at him from the darkness. Then, it charged. The predator and the prey. Jack barely had time to react before the beast lunged. It was huge, easily the size of a bear, with sleek, dark fur and long, sharp fangs. Its muscular limbs moved like a shadow, silent and deadly. Jack dove to the side as the creature's claws slashed through the air where he had been standing. He hit the ground hard, rolling onto his knees. The beast snarled, pacing in a slow circle around him. Jack's heart pounded. He wasn't a trained hunter. He wasn't even a fighter. He was just a guy trying to not get eaten. His mind raced. He couldn't overpower the beast. He didn't have the strength. But maybe he didn't need to. Valkyrie's words echoed in his mind. Speed. Smart. Jack took a slow step back, eyes darting around. The jungle was full of weapons, fallen branches, thick vines, sharp rocks. His gaze landed on a large, gnarled tree with exposed roots. An idea formed. Jack raised his spear, taking a defensive stance. "All right, ugly. Come and get me." The beast snarled and charged again. Jack waited, timing it perfectly. Then, at the last second, he dodged. The creature's momentum carried it forward, and its massive claws got tangled in the thick roots. It stumbled. Jack didn't waste a second. He spun the spear in his hands and thrust it forward, aiming for the creature's exposed side. The spear struck true. The beast roared, thrashing wildly. Jack yanked the spear free and scrambled backward. The creature let out one final growl before collapsing onto the jungle floor. Silence fell. Jack stood there, breathing heavily, heart hammering in his chest. Then he let out a shaky laugh. I did it. He had hunted. He had won. The warriors return. Jack dragged the beast's body through the jungle, his arms burning with effort. By the time he reached the village, his legs felt like jelly. The warriors had gathered at the entrance, waiting. When they saw what he carried, their expressions shifted. The smirking warriors who had doubted him, their eyes widened in shock. The warriors who had hoped for his success, they grinned in approval. Valkyrie stepped forward, her silver eyes shining with pride. Jack dropped the spear and leaned against a wooden post, panting. "Okay, so, do I pass?" The elder stepped forward, inspecting the beast. Then he nodded, raising his hands. The village erupted into cheers. Jack let out a tired laugh. "That's a yes, then." Valkyrie clapped a massive hand on his back. "Jack. Hunter." Jack exhaled, shaking his head. "I'm never doing that again." Valkyrie smirked. "Tomorrow, more hunting." Jack groaned. "Of course." As the warriors gathered to celebrate, Jack couldn't help but smile. He had proven himself. He wasn't just a lost human anymore. He was a warrior of the jungle. And for the first time since crashing here, he felt like he belonged. Jack sat near the village's great bonfire, chewing on roasted meat and listening to the deep rhythm of the drums. The warriors around him laughed, clapped their hands, and shared stories in their booming voices. He was one of them now. For days, he had trained, fought, and hunted alongside them. The bruises on his body proved it. He was still smaller than them, still weaker in raw strength, but he had learned something important. He didn't need to be the strongest to survive. Speed, smart, that was his way. But something was different tonight. Jack could feel it. Valkyrie sat beside him, quieter than usual. The village elder, the scared man with silver hair, stood at the edge of the firelight, watching him with serious eyes. Then the elder raised his hand. The drums stopped. Silence fell. Jack swallowed. "Okay, that's probably not good." Valkyrie turned to him. "Final test." Jack blinked. "Wait. There's another test." Valkyrie nodded. "Warrior must prove strength. Prove courage." She pointed toward the jungle. "Final battle." Jack felt a sinking feeling in his stomach. "Oh, great. Who am I fighting this time?" Valkyrie's silver eyes gleamed. The jungle's true predator. The monster of the wild. Jack stood at the edge of the village, staring into the dark jungle. The elder had explained the test. Deep in the jungle, there was a beast, larger, stronger, and far more dangerous than anything he had faced before. It was not a simple hunt. It was a fight for survival. Jack gripped the spear in his hands, heart pounding. This was crazy. But he had come this far. He wasn't about to turn back now. Valkyrie clapped his shoulder. "Fight smart, Jack." Jack exhaled. "Yeah, smart. Right." Then he stepped into the jungle. The hunter becomes the hunted. The jungle was silent. Too silent. Jack moved carefully, spear raised, eyes scanning the shadows. He knew something was out there, watching, waiting. Then he saw it. Glowing red eyes. The beast moved, a shadow in the trees. It was fast. Faster than anything he had faced before. Jack barely had time to react before it lunged. He dove to the side as massive claws slashed through the air. He rolled to his feet, gripping his spear tightly. The creature let out a low, rumbling growl. Now that it had stepped into the moonlight, Jack could finally see it clearly. It was huge, at least twice the size of the last predator he had fought. Its dark fur was thick like armor, and its long, curved fangs gleamed like daggers. Jack exhaled. Well, I'm dead. The beast snarled and attacked again. Jack ran. Not because he was afraid, though he definitely was, but because he had a plan. He dodged through the trees, leaping over roots, ducking under vines. The beast crashed through the jungle behind him, smashing through branches, tearing through leaves. But Jack was faster. He led the creature to a narrow part of the jungle, where thick vines twisted between trees like a giant spiderweb. Then he stopped. He turned, facing the beast. He had to time this perfectly. The monster lunged, claws out, fangs bared. At the last second, Jack jumped. The beast slammed into the vines. The jungle came alive. The vines snapped, twisted, and wrapped around the creature's limbs. The beast thrashed, roaring in fury, but the more it struggled, the more trapped it became. Jack landed on the other side, breathing hard. Then he smiled. He had won. The warriors returned. The village roared in celebration when Jack returned. He stepped into the firelight, scratched, bruised, and covered in dirt, but alive. The warriors pounded their chests, chanting his name. Even the elder, who rarely showed emotion, nodded in approval. Jack looked at Valkyrie. She grinned, pride shining in her silver eyes. "You fought smart," she said. Jack smirked. "I do have my moments." The elder raised a hand, and the village fell silent. Then, in a deep voice, he spoke. Valkyrie translated, "Jack, warrior of the jungle." Jack felt a strange warmth in his chest. He had started this journey as an outsider, a weak, lost human. Now, he was one of them, a warrior. And for the first time since crashing on this alien world, he was home.